My name is Julian Bleeker, and I'm a designer and engineer, and sometimes I'm an artist who does different projects using technology, and I'm very pleased to be able to share some ideas and some projects with you, and just to sort of frame what I'm going to talk about, I think I want to focus the lecture today on essentially trying to find new ways, new sources of design and creative inspiration by looking at science fiction. So using science fiction stories, or science fiction films as ways to inspire our minds to think about new ways of creating new projects or new design concepts, or just ways to explore new ideas. And so that's going to be the topic of the lecture today. And I'll do that by sharing with you some of my own ideas, and then some examples of where I think that sharing of ideas from science fiction and the real world has actually happened, and done so in very very productive and very enlightening sorts of ways. So I'll talk a little bit. I'll show you some pictures, and then we'll look at a couple of short video clips, and then I'll talk some more, and then we'll have time for some questions and answers. So is that okay? Thumbs up. Is that okay? Okay. Very good. So this is the topic of the lecture. I call this idea of combining science fact, science fiction, and design. I call that design fiction. So obviously it's a combination of the word design and the word science fiction. So rather than saying science fiction, we're saying design fiction. And the reason for coming up with a new word is because I think there's something quite new about this concept. It's something that it didn't just materialize overnight, but it seemed to be that there was a number of people that I started noticing who seemed to be not just writing science fiction and not just doing design, but sort of doing both the things at the same time. And it was at first very, of course, it's quite interesting to see someone to create an object, a design object that seems so far out there and so far from the future that you couldn't really say it's a traditional bit of like a design work. So it's not something that you might see in a store, or that you might notice someone carrying around. And usually these were things that were only maybe one or two were created, and the purpose of the object seemed to be more to get people to think than it was to get them to, so for example, do something useful with the object. So it was more a way of having a conversation with the object than it was to actually use it in some very traditional way. So this is me, and this is sort of where I share some of my ideas, both on a website and through Twitter. Those are my two Twitter handles. This is mostly just sort of my ideas, and then here's where I talk about things that I oftentimes blog about. I wonder, would it be possible to see the audience? Because I don't see video right now. Is that possible? Is it okay to leave it like that? Because it helps me just to see people. Is that all right? Yes?
Yes, you're okay.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay, so the first part of this talk called Undisciplined Creative Technology Practices. And there's a lot going on there, so I'll just try to explain it quite as simply as I can. So basically, the starting principle of this idea of doing design fiction is to not restrict yourself by what people might expect a designer to do. So really reaching beyond the constraints that you might typically have as, say, an industrial designer or as an electrical engineer or as a computer scientist or as a graphic designer, and draw from as many other ideas that you find interesting and creative and inspiring, and pull those into what you do so that you really are sort of undisciplined. And by that I mean that you, without getting into trouble, you sort of don't play by the traditional rules. So be a little bit untraditional, look for sources of creativity in unexpected places. And I think there's something quite nice about combining that kind of creativity with technology, especially today when technology is so much a part of our lives and the ways in which we communicate with each other, or the ways in which we share, or the ways in which we really participate and engage the world. So combining that with technology, which has become almost like the air that we breathe, it's just so much a part of what is around us. So using that in a creative way can yield to very, very interesting and very curious and very intriguing creative practices. And probably one of the easier ways for me to explain in more concrete terms what this means is to talk just a little bit about my background. This will help you understand kind of where I'm coming from. So I'm an engineer. My background is in electrical engineering and computer science. And while so I did very typical sort of engineering, and I worked for a company designing mini computers back in the 1990s. And after a while, I became very interested in sort of cutting edge technology ideas, especially ones that combined some kind of artistic or creative component. And I spent some time working in the virtual reality field in the early 90s. In the early 1990s, I was working with a lab in Seattle, Washington, that was doing work with virtuality. And that was all of a sudden this kind of engineering practice that was really kind of very strange, very unusual kind of engineering practice, one that I think there's a lot of hope for it, doing some new things and really exploring new possibilities for combining engineering and technology and creative practices. And through that, I became quite interested in not just the technology, but also the people. And I started studying essentially technology as a part of society, as opposed to technology just as circuits or computer programs or algorithms. And that got me to think more about what the possibilities were if you expanded what you understood to be engineering and what you understood to be technology. So I started combining these two interests with technology and society, just to see where they might lead and see if they might offer me new ways of looking at how to innovate within the technology field. And I ended up getting a doctorate degree studying these combinations of things. And the one thing that I want to show you here, so does everyone know Arnold Schwarzenegger? He's the governor of California, and he was also the Terminator in the movies. So he actually, that's his signature up there. So he actually signed my diploma from school, which I found, which was really kind of great for me, because I happened to write about the film The Terminator for my dissertation, because I was very interested in the technology that the film described with these robots from the future. And I was trying to think about the ways in which the technology in the film, so the Terminator robots, actually taught us lessons about what the possibilities for technology were. So we try to say that in different ways. So the fact that there was these very high technology robots in the Terminator was a way in which people in the world who saw the film could start to understand what robots could possibly be. So the story of Terminator and all the sequels and all the other science fiction films that we like that have robots, they tell a story about what the world might look like with robots. And usually those stories, I mean, of course, because it's a film, those stories about robots are usually very dramatic, and there's maybe lots of special effects and these kinds of things. But the film communicates to very, very many people and starts them thinking about what that world might look like. And I was very fascinated with that capability of a really good science fiction film to essentially shape what people think about some part of technology. So in this case, there's the robots. For other films, it might be something else, and we'll talk about what some of those other things might be. And so this is what I called the paper that I wrote for my dissertation. I called it The Reality Effect of Technoscience. And the reality effect, the idea that I was trying to develop was that that technology and science, a lot of the ideas behind them, a lot of the ways in which people who are not specialists, so people who are not scientists themselves, come to understand what technology is and what science is. Some of that happens through big Hollywood films. So the films take some idea and they wrap it in a good story with some good actors, and then people go to the theater and they watch it, and then they come away with some idea about what the possibilities are for technology, what the possibilities are for some aspect of science. So this is what I was looking into. And so why did I want to combine these things? Well, it's just, for me, it's the short, one of the short answers is that I'm fascinated with technology. I'm fascinated with what engineering allows us to do with technology. And the other side of understand society and technology is because really, aside from the fun aspects, I think that there are a lot of possibilities for technology and science for making the world a better place to live in. And I think you need more than just the skills of an engineer to do that. You need to understand much broader topics, much broader issues about what technology can be and what it can, how it can help the world. And so combining that with this idea that, in this case, science fiction stories are become one very important way in which you communicate to a wide audience what the possibilities are for technology in society. And so trying to understand how that communication works and how you can actually develop ideas and inspire people to change the world in certain ways is a way in which I'm trying to combine these things. Combining science fiction and combining science fact or engineering, bringing all these things together into one mechanism for helping to imagine the world in a different way. And so I think it's these two things. On the one hand, you have what I'm calling material practices. Those are the practices that engineers or scientists or designers, what they do. They make things. They create objects, or they fashion buildings, or these kinds of things. And then there are these other practices besides making things. They're the practices that actually make knowledge, that create meaning in the world. And I see things like authors or writers or filmmakers are very good at doing that, of making meaning, of telling a story, of combining some of the things that the other practices create, putting a story around them to help them become real, help them become material parts of the world.